Hello, everybody, and welcome to the April 30th, 2024 edition of the Week to Week Political Roundtable from the Commonwealth Club World Affairs of California. I'm John Zipper, your host for Week to Week, and I'm the club's Vice President of Media and Editorial. I'm pleased to present our great panel for tonight, and I'll start at the far end with Melissa Cain. She's an attorney, political analyst. She's the host of the Get Out the Bet podcast. She's the co-host of the new Voice of San Francisco podcast, and you can follow her on X at Constitution Mel. Next to her is Josh Cain, but a different spelling, K-O-E-H-N. And he's a senior political reporter at the San Francisco Standard, and he's on X at Josh_K-O-E-H-N. And next to me is Joe Cain, but he spells it G-A-R-O-F-O-L-I.
The old Cain panel.
He is a senior political writer at the San Francisco Chronicle, and he's, of course, on X at Joe Garofoli. So welcome back, Joe. I think you know how we do it here. There are question cards spread throughout the auditorium, so if you have questions, write them down. Pro tip, best to do it earlier in the program than later, because if I get questions like 5 minutes before we're ending, I really don't have much chance to work them in. But we're now going to get started, and we're going to start with Donald Trump in court.
Still.
Totally unbiased audience reaction. The former president is in court these days, as everyone knows. He's facing the first in a series of criminal trials. Let's discuss what's at stake, and I'm going to go to our lawyer on the far end of the stage there. Melissa, and this is because I don't think a lot of us understand gag orders and contempt of court and stuff like that. Trump has been found not guilty, but he was found to have violated the gag order by Judge Juan Merchan, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he was fined $9,000 for this. By the way, I should note that he only needs to sell 150 Trump Bibles to make that money up. But
how many Snickers?
Yes. But tell us a bit about that and kind of that process. Does that really mean anything? Is it a slap on the wrist, or is this the first step to potentially more significant punishment? Does a contempt of court proceeding, if you will, affect the main part of it? Can that feed into the judge's ultimate decision, or is this just procedural stuff on the side?
Well, I mean, it doesn't help, right? I mean, it's certainly, you're not going to endear yourself to the judge, but Donald Trump seems to have this ability to sort of absorb and get more powerful based on when people are upset with him. And so this idea that he keeps violating the gag order, I mean, if you're a Trump supporter, this is just more of you sticking it to the man, right? This whole thing is unfair. So, I'm going to violate the gag. Fine, I'll pay the $9,000. But the fact that he's now, when he speaks, it's illegal, when he not that it is, but, he can sort of put that out there that, I'm speaking out, despite the personal sacrifice to me, is something that I think only helps him in a weird way. And the judge is in a tough position because you need to, the things that he's trying to do and to keep order in his courtroom are good and normal. But if you martyr this person every time you try to impose very normal things. I've never heard of a case where you have multiple gag orders where you've actually had to fine. Usually just it's a gag order and you go, oh, sorry. But the idea that this guy he has multiple times flagrantly in a press conference right outside the courthouse violated the gag order is unique. But if you're the judge, what can you do? I mean, these are the tools in your toolbox, and every time you deploy them, again, he sort of just absorbs it and gets bigger, every time it happens. So the judge is in a tough spot. And if you're talking about a case in which this person is at all, I mean, remember, at issue is like, are you trying to influence the election by doing these other things when this person is once again, very publicly, at all costs, trying to influence an election? That's certainly not, probably not lost on the judge, of course, in the case. But it is very unique. This is not normal. Nothing about this is normal. It feels normal because you're like, oh, Trump is in the court again. But violating a bunch of gag orders, not normal. Imposing a gag order is not normal. This is very unusual all across the board.
Josh, it does seem that Donald Trump is kind of the only one who understands the media aspect of this race, that he's an actor in this thing and not going through just a straight legal proceedings. What are you thinking about as you're kind of getting the news on what's going on there?
Well, Trump has always been able to manipulate the media in a variety of different ways. And really, the biggest issue is, in some ways, a distraction tactic. I was having a conversation today with one of my colleagues, and they were like, do you think it's more on purpose, or is it just more of like who he is as a kind of an egotist, kind of narcissist tendencies? And I think it actually is one of those things where if you condition yourself enough over time, it doesn't really matter if you mean to do it or not. It's just going to have the intended effect. And so essentially when he throws everything against the wall, he sees what sticks, but he also can't help himself from, like you said, Melissa, poking the bear, getting these kind of contempt issues to arise in court. And so when it comes to owning the libs, that's just like in his DNA. He's going to continue to own the libs over and over, and it's probably not going to help him in court. But for him, he's probably thinking this as like, you know what? Even no matter what happens in court, people are still going to vote for me. However, we did see some polling that said I think around 20 to 26% of Trump supporters would reconsider if he's found guilty of criminal charges. And so as he kind of like does this fine line, dancing over it and just getting right up to it, if he ends up getting convicted of a crime, that could be kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back in giving Biden a way to like get reelected, which is looking very tenuous at the moment.
Joe, what do you make of what's going on?
Well, that's exactly right. Donald Trump's faced down 91 felony counts, and he's still, if you look at the polls, he's still up 41-39 over Biden nationally. He's ahead in some swing states, or they're tied, or back and forth. I mean, in any other universe, this person would not even be close. It goes to the power of what people are feeling about the economy. The inflation is still high. People are feeling it in their pocketbooks. I sat down with a bunch of a polling group yesterday, and I was saying, why? How is this possible? And inflation is number one, and the age question, of course, is two. Even though Biden is 4 years older than Trump, but he gives because of his pushbacks and his blustery appearance, he gives the impression of being, a much 20 years younger. But this is going to be every vote will count on this, and in no election like we've seen in a long time.
Do you believe that the polls that say if he gets convicted, we won't vote for him? I don't know. At this point, I'm like, I don't think anything would.
Well, go ahead, Josh.
I would agree that like skepticism is warranted because over and over Trump supporters have said, actually this would be a red line for me. And then they're like, well, what's left? Vivek, Ted Cruz, like what is there? So like at the end of the day, I don't trust what the polling says for Trump voters because they're not generally defined by values that they actually stick to. I have a lot of family in the Midwest, evangelical Christians, the kind of people that wholeheartedly support Trump. If you ask them, like, does Trump actually live his life by the values that you have set for yourself and your families, they would say no. But at the end of the day, they have been, in many ways, radicalized to believe that actually the Democrats are trying to hurt them in a variety of ways. And they also vote on a few core issues that Trump will always hew to because he's proven it with his work on the Supreme Court justices. Yeah. The thing that I wanted to touch on is actually I think that maybe while they might not flip, they might sit it out. And that's the thing that actually both candidates really have to worry about, particularly Biden, because young voters are just not mobilized in a way that actually is going to matter when it comes to swing states, because we say every vote matters, but really it only matters in a handful of states.
And exactly. That's
and so like if Trump voters decide to sit it out or for some reason they like fall victim to Robert Kennedy Jr.'s like whole spiel, which is just all over the map. I think actually that could be the kind of thing that maybe has a balancing effect of young voters sitting it out and Trump voters sitting it out.
But as of today, we Californians, now you can vote for Robert F. Kennedy in the fall. He will be on the California ballot. Oh boy, I could feel the excitement in the room.
There were some people who wrote him in the primary election who wrote it. I went and I was looking for a different project, but you can actually, fun fact, you can look at PDFs of everybody's ballot on the San Francisco elections website. I know, super fun. Saturday night for me. I looked at like 2,000 ballots, and there were a bunch of people who wrote in RFK. And there were also a bunch of people who wrote in uncommitted, right? They wanted to be part of this, sort of, I'm not voting for a Biden. And so we had in the primary was among Biden, or in the Democratic primary, there were 17,000 undervotes, which is extraordinary. Usually it's like 15. I went back to look historically because I was like, that seems like a lot. 1,500 is about what you saw in 2016 and 2012. 17,000 undervotes. That means that's basically people who either didn't vote at all or wrote something in and didn't fill anything out. So that's RFK people, that's uncommitted people, that's whatever. That's people who are not going to vote for Joe Biden or are not enthusiastic. Now, this is San Francisco, we all know where our electoral college votes are going. But in other places, in other states, I mean, if this kind of thing, if this many folks are disillusioned and refusing to vote for Joe Biden, that is going to be really significant. But anyway, yeah, weird. Wrote it in.
While we're talking about Donald Trump, at least in his court cases, talk a bit about his I can do anything immunity claim. That has gone to the Supreme Court. Maybe again, Ms. Attorney.
What would you like to know how terrifying this is?
So a lot of people have been trying to parse out what we heard or what we know from the hearings that were held, and it's ranging from people kind of like hair on fire freaking out, oh my gosh, they're going to give him everything he wants, to like George Conway saying, hold on, actually what they're doing is trying to, of course, narrowly craft a decision. Or they're just trying to kick it down the line so that they don't have to make a decision, which,
There are some technical, I won't bore you with the technical, there are some technical reasons why they could kick it back and just say, we're not going to touch this. But as you know, the argument that Trump's lawyers are making, and this all has to do with the fake electors lawsuit. So, I mean, it's not, I think that there are varying degrees of sort of ick factors when it comes to Donald Trump's legal woes, and this, at least for me, is like right up there at the top. I mean, this is just extraordinary, inexcusable behavior, and so that's the facts that are before the court, is whether or not he has sort of total immunity for what basically what his lawyers are arguing, any official acts. And so what he's saying is basically anything that's an official act, you have total immunity over. So, of course, the key is what's an official act, right? And that is the thing that they are grappling with. So, we have a really compelling set of facts. Like, this is some really indefensible stuff, especially when you're standing in front of the 9 justices talking about fake electors and how that is okay under your theory. And I will tell you, Conway's, not a single one of them were buying this. Like, this whole idea of like just complete immunity for whatever the president does that is super personal, is an official act and needs immunity. And so it's chilling to listen to the recording of the arguments, and you can hear, I think it's Justice Kagan, although I was listening, so it might have been Sotomayor, who basically said, look, let me just give you the hypothetical. If the president tells a general to stage a coup because I don't want to leave office, is that an official act? And the guy goes, could be. Hold on. And none of the justices were like, oh, that's the thing we can get behind. They all spent the entire 2.5 hours of the hearing trying to draw the line, essentially. And that's sort of what the debate is about. It's how do you both prevent a president from going nuts? And I'll tell you, Justice Jackson was on fire. You can tell when someone has memorized something or is reading something versus just speaking from the heart really passionately, and it just was coming right out. She had a couple of exchanges that were really amazing. there is, of course, this problem. Right? If the president doesn't have the looming threat of criminal charges, Lord only knows, right? I mean, we've already seen what one can do. What are we doing? The opposite, though, is a legitimate issue, right? I mean, you can't just have, sort of fired up prosecutors out there trying to make a name for themselves by going after sitting presidents for things that they should have some immunity for. So I think they all understand that they've got to draw it in the middle, and at the end of the day, they may just kick it because it is hard. It is very, very hard, and they just floated like 15 different tests and different hypotheticals, but it was chilling to listen to the justices. Again, I think it was Kagan say, what if, and this is the other hypothetical, what if the president told someone to kill his opponent because he thinks his opponent is corrupt, and this person goes off and does it? Is that an official act? Maybe. Freaky. Absolutely freaky.
Did you read that as them drawing a line, or do you get the impression that they're going to say, well, we're going to kick it back down? What's your gut tell you?
I couldn't find any, I'm listening to it, I'm trying to figure out like where are the points of agreement, right? So because you need that 5-person majority, like is there any group that's sort of coalescing around like one theory, one test? And I couldn't find any. And so when you have that situation, I think there's there's a big risk or a big incentive, I think, to just say, I'm going to have a very technical thing. I'm going to send it back on this very technical thing and really not touch this. But what I didn't hear is anyone saying, oh, we're good with that. We're good with this total immunity for official acts. Did not seem to be playing with anyone, which thank goodness. And so what we will definitely get is either a test or a kickback. But I don't think, from what I heard, I didn't hear any support for this bonkers total immunity idea.
And just for definitions, if they were to kick it back, that means they would send it back to another court that would then have to make a decision, or the previous lower court's decision would hold?
Oh, sorry, would say kick it back. They would, right now, the DC Circuit, basically you had a complaint filed and then everything stopped, right? We didn't get into any of the trial stuff, right? Basically, they said, look, on its face, you can't go after the president for any of the things on this document. And so they haven't really moved since then. So when I say kick it back, you would have to go back and have the lower court probably parse out let's say there are 10 acts that make up the problem in this case. 4 of them are not official. And they agreed, actually, that 4 of them are not official acts. So he could be prosecuted based on these 4 acts. Problem is, what do you do with the other 6? Are they official? Do you have to rip them out of the complaint? And so that would go back to the DC Circuit, and they would have to sort of figure out, can this move forward based on a different theory of the case? But that's what I mean by kick it back, essentially, is they would pass the buck. No decision is what I'm trying to say.
It just makes all the issues in San Francisco seem very easy. Like,
Yeah.
We should note that there's the New York hush money case, there's the Georgia election case, there's the federal election case, there's the classified documents civil fraud case. Does anyone think any of the others will go to trial before the election?
If they
No.
go, they're not going to be completed by Election Day. And the Georgia case in particular is extremely complex. I mean, that's like a mob case where you're trying to it's going to be very difficult to explain, and also a long one to do. And he's jamming as he always does, as anyone would do. You try and delay the start of a legal proceeding if you have the money and the legal resources to do it. And so I don't think, it may go to those 20% of voters who might change their mind, but I don't think they'll have to make that decision.
yeah, I'd be shocked if actually there's any definitive judgment found before November. It just seems to me that there's no court that wants to actually be the one that is, in the so-called crosshairs of Trump supporters, and really seen as swaying the race. I think in the end, it's just going to be a heads up, and then all the legal stuff would probably be worked out later. But that's just my gut instinct, not as in any way a legal scholar.
Well, look, hey, the wheels of justice turn slowly. And maybe for folks on the left as well, they're seeing, look, you see this trial. What do we have? Every single day, all it is Trump, Trump, Trump. Trump went to sleep. He went to sleep on his left. He went to sleep on his right. He went to sleep a little bit. He dropped his jaw a little bit, drooled. Like, this is the coverage. Like, you cannot buy this kind of name in the headlines, right? Like, it might not be the worst thing to hold off on some of this and kind of try to suck some of the air out and make him actually campaign and like run a campaign and spend some money and do some things. So for the left, I mean, this whole idea of like, it's intrinsically good that we get these convictions and that we move forward. It's like, I'm not totally sure he's suffering from this wall-to-wall coverage of every movement.
Well, because when he does open his mouth, like he did this extensive interview with Time Magazine, it's like, wow, and again, in any other campaign, this would be fodder for years. When he's talking about, taking local police departments under the control of the federal government as a deportation force and deporting 15 to 20 million people living in this country. I mean, first of all, you couldn't do that in California. We have a law that it would be tied up in courts and such. But just to say that and to have in your mind that you're going to do that is terrifying.
Yeah, just to add, I think before we worry about like, does he get convicted and does he go to jail or something like that, I think the bigger thing that Democrats need to be worrying about is just like really explaining to people the threat that Trump poses in a reelection, being reelected, I should say, because all of a sudden, if you look at Trump's presidency, it was pretty ineffective in a lot of ways. They made a ton of mistakes, especially out of the gate, and they had to kind of find their way because he was surrounded by idiots. And so what happens is
Inexperienced political professionals.
Yeah, I mean, inexperienced idiots. And so, now, what happens is the Republican Party, Reince Priebus, and all these other people who are, once again rallying around him, I think they realize, okay, now if we get power again with Trump, we can actually know how the levers of power work. We know a plan, a blueprint that we have for the way of reshaping all of the federal government, the way that we can actually alter our foreign policy in a way that empowers Russia and other kind of adversaries and real threats to the entire world. And so I think if Democrats don't really do a better job of articulating the real threat that Trump poses, because he's not going to be the same kind of president he would be the first time around, and not surrounded by the same kind of people who are just grifting, but instead trying to actually really probably move the needle in a real way through the government. I think if they can't explain that, that's when Democrats really run into trouble. And to Melissa's point, we're focusing on him drooling on himself in court. The more time we spend on that, the less time we are worrying about the real issues that actually need to be articulated to voters.
I think it was Charlie Sykes who's described it as the velociraptors have learned how to open the doors.
Jurassic Park. There we go.
Well, let's talk about some other presidential campaigns. It's Charlie Sykes, not me. Other presidential campaign info, and I want to talk a bit about RFK Jr. It's like every week you hear someone on a completely different side saying, this is really bad for Biden, and the next week this is really bad for Trump, and I don't know who to believe.
And the campaigns don't know who to believe because they're both attacking him, and that means they both feel threatened by him. They see the numbers that right now, if RFK is in the race, it's Biden. This is national. Trump 41, Biden 39, RFK 11. Even in California. Kind of RFK is a Californian after all. It's Biden 40, Trump 28, Kennedy 11. So he will be a factor if he can get on the ballot. Right now he's only on the ballot in I think 2 states, Michigan, key swing state. California will be on the Utah. Nobody cares, and maybe well, with all due respect to our friends in Salt Lake City, so if he can get on the ballot in a couple key swing states, who knows? Who knows? I mean, we've seen how third party candidates can change the trajectory of a race. Ross Perot, Exhibit A, and so Kennedy has that same potential.
I seem to remember, though, that exit polls showed Ross Perot pulled from both candidates, kind of like RFK is. I mean, I think part of the reason why no one can figure it out is because he's actually pulling from both of them. He's not definitively, it's not like a Green Party candidate who's really going to pull all from the left.
Right, and the candidate, the ballot he's going to be on in California is the American Independent Party, which was started by George Wallace in 1968 as a segregationist. When he was a segregationist.
You remember that the First Lady Jennifer Siebel was a member of the American Independent Party?
Yes.
I don't think many members. No. She didn't. I don't think she thought she was being an independent. I don't think she knew their platform. And a lot of people see it and they go, "Oh, American Independent Party. Well, I'm independent. I'm an American. That's a party." Ba-da-da-da. So I think a lot of folks who are registered as the American Independent Party don't know what that is. And when Gavin Newsom first ran, somebody went and pulled her voting records and saw that she had to quickly unregister from the American Independent Party. But it's an honest mistake, I think.
The LA Times did a great story a few years ago where they surveyed the several 100,000 members that the American Independent Party had here, and 3 of 4 were like, "Oops, it's not what I intended." Because in California, if you don't like either party or any party, you can be a no party preference voter. But a lot of people were like, "Oh, I'm an independent voter." Well, not these independents don't want same-sex marriage or abortion rights. And I'm sorry?
Nader. You didn't discuss Nader and Gore.
There you go, Nader. Absolutely. Talking about 2000, yeah.
Well, to just the point of not knowing what party you're really a part of. I mean, Kennedy supporters, and I apologize if there are any in the room, but they generally tend to be low information voters. I mean, if you actually listen to Robert Kennedy talk, it doesn't actually even subscribe to any kind of common sense. He goes on Joe Rogan and will tell you about a medication you've never heard before, and some meathead with a shaved head will be like, "Wow, I didn't know about that." And you didn't know about it because it's not a real thing. And but unfortunately, Joe Rogan has probably the biggest podcasting audience in the world. And so what happens is you have Robert Kennedy out there just spewing nonsense with a gravelly voice. And people were like, "Oh, well, that's some kind of stature. There feels like some experience level to this. I recognize his name. I remember his dad was a good guy." All of these things. But when you add it all up and when you pull back the curtain on it, there's literally nothing there that actually suggests that he would be a competent leader, to have any real basis in fact. In many ways, he's probably more dangerous than Trump because he's actually just not even competent to lead because he can't even get the basics right. And it just sounds good. I guess, and that's the problem. Everybody says, "I'm very independent. I'm a libertarian. I'm a free thinker. You can't control me." Used to be that was all Trump. And now they're like, "Oh, well, Trump's corrupt. So now I'm going to be with this free thinker." But this free thinker doesn't actually think.
Well, what's surprising? The surprising thing was for all this 12, 13% this guy has. I went to when he announced his vice presidential candidate in Oakland, who was from Oakland, Nicole Shanahan, or grew up there at least. The room was half empty, and it was a small room. It was the old Kaiser Auditorium in Oakland on Lake Merritt. For those of you who know that was, it's maybe several hundred people there, and it wasn't like a woo, yes, RFK kind of crowd. They're it's like a lot of golf clapping in there. And I was surprised that for people who you'd think and a couple of people talked to I remember RFK. My mom, one guy told me my mom remembered RFK, and so I decided to come check him out. So it was a curiosity seekers, and people were just kind of in the wilderness. Yeah.
Maybe he also may be getting, of course, a lot of protest votes, right? I mean, people don't
He
feel
might
like
be-
writing in, to hell with both of you,
Right.
vote for RFK to sort of give the finger to the other two, especially in a place like California where, again, it's not really in question what's going to happen here. If 12 or even 20% of the voters vote for RFK won't necessarily materially change the outcome.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? So it might be he might just be scooping up the people who are just I don't like that guy or that guy. I'm just going to go with the guy with the name or the initials or whatever.
This is also just kind of the era that we live in, too. And I've been covering politics for, I don't know, a dozen plus years. And Joe's got me by a few years and would maybe even be able to speak to this better. It's essentially that it's almost like in sports where you got your coach and you're just not kind of getting over the hump and you're like, oh, I want to change. But stats have shown that the teams that actually stick with coaches in the lean, mediocre years tend to actually do better because there's consistency. And voters right now are not asking for consistency. They're asking for results, immediate. We live in a time in which we expect our food to be delivered within minutes. If an Uber takes more than 3 minutes, we're like, what the heck's going on here? And so, I do think that what happens is the pandemic only exacerbated that. And the real anger and angst that voters have, where there's just this sense that there's something wrong. And because of that, we're not giving people enough time to really take their platform and really get the effective change. And then sometimes what will happen is we'll replace an elected official and we'll see the policies that they put into action. And then the next person's getting the credit, though, because it takes a couple years to go into effect. And so I think, for Trump, all the things that I think about Trump, there are a couple, a handful of things that he did that actually Biden got to take credit for, especially with the resurgence in jobs. I mean, obviously jobs were going to come back in the Biden administration because he couldn't get any lower. But at the same time, the economy is doing better in ways than most people realize. And if Trump were to become president again, obviously Kennedy's not going to be president, but if Trump becomes president again, then he'll be able to ride a little bit of the coattails of what things Biden's put in place. And so I do think that what happens is, and we see it in local elections too. Mayor Breed is obviously facing a very tough reelection fight, and not going to say that things are obviously better right now, but there are just little incremental things that the administration has done that whoever does become mayor next year is probably going to be able to take advantage of and then claim credit for.
Yeah, and one of the things about Biden is a lot of his signature policies that he's asking people to say his accomplishments are those kind of long-term things. The Infrastructure Act, we're going to be building roads. Well, they'll be built in a couple of years. We'll fix that bridge. Well, that's going to take a while. The CHIPS Act, yeah, we're building those, but it's going to be a few years.
But I don't think people are wrong to he's been in office several years. How long does it take to do something about the border? And at least acknowledge that there's a problem.
Perfectly true.
Yeah, that's a
Stop
big
telling
problem.
people that the economy's okay if it's not. If it's not in their kitchen, if it's not in their grocery store, it's
Right.
not. There are things that he should be doing that people are rightfully upset that he is not. And I don't think it's just we want a, politician type of DoorDash. We want and you're right. I mean, there are a lot of things that are investments that I think are really good and that are going to bear fruit in the future. But I think for people who are, let's find somebody else, whether it be RFK or Trump or whatever, there are legit reasons to say, Biden, you have not done enough stuff or even shown that you give a crap about enough stuff that we care about while you've been in office.
The border is a very good point.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Well, let's talk about something else that's roiling the political world, and that is the campus protests about the war in the Middle East. Someone in the audience must have known we were going to talk about this because they asked, why do you think the ceasefire protests have been spreading on college campuses? How should growing anti-Semitism be dealt with?
Well, let me jump on a part of that. I wrote something about that about a week ago. It was out at Berkeley, and I've been exposed to this we all have for months and months now, and a lot of that is the why the campus protests are coming is because young people are frustrated that sort of tangentially what we were just talking about aren't doing anything. They're not doing enough. Again, a huge, intractable, long-term issue in the Middle East. But they're saying that Biden is not listening to them, and voting isn't going to do anything about it. We voted for this, we voted for that, and nothing's happening. So the only way to do it is to put my body in the line, to do something that is going to get attention, whether it be closing down the Bay Bridge, whether it be closing down the Golden Gate Bridge, whether it be jamming 880, whether it be forming an encampment in UC Berkeley or Humboldt, which is closed or has gone virtual for the rest of the year, or Columbia University, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that's rooted in frustration, lack of the system, and we see it in the this March primary here in California. Young people voted at a rate of about 16-17%. UC Berkeley, the city of Berkeley, the special city council race, a couple of weeks ago in a district that was heavily students, again, 16% of the eligible voters voted, and that's a lot of those were students, and it wasn't like two old people on the. Well, due respect to all of us here, but it wasn't like two old people on that. Thank you. It was two students running. So. It's rooted in that part of it is just rooted in frustration that I'm going to do this.
I was talking to our VP of Education. We have an education program here that has a whole program called Creating Citizens, and it's about educating and involving young people in obviously democratic and civic sort of issues. And just there were a couple experiences. One that happened here last night where a student made a comment about not voting. They just didn't think it mattered. And we had an event over in Berkeley a while ago, and feedback there from a number of students was the same thing. It's just, we don't see the point. Some of it kind of strikes me as just ignorance of, well, yeah, you don't always get the perfect candidates. I mean, it's not Christmas. But also, I think they've come of age during a time when they've been told by both the far left and the far right that this country's garbage. Remember Trump? I guess that's me who keeps making that noise, isn't it? I'm sorry. Trump, this country's terrible. It's gone to waste. It's corrupt. It's terrible. And on the left, it's, this country is a racist, warmongering, colonizing, blah, blah, blah. Whether you agree with them or not, that's the message that kind of keeps coming around, and that it's hopeless, and that the answer is not civic engagement. It is not involvement in politics. It is not running for office yourself. It is, getting out there and burning the place down. And I guess we're seeing that. John?
Yeah, I think the sense of it's certainly not apathy, because that's not what we're seeing. What we are seeing is anger, frustration, a sense of hopelessness, and also feeling like the systems are rigged. And I mean, this isn't like necessarily something that's brand new. I mean, like we can go back to the 60s and people were saying essentially the same thing about Vietnam and other stuff like that. And so the problem is that you actually have one party, the Republicans, who are essentially telling you the system is corrupt, it's rigged, and they're trying to hurt you and take away from you. And you have another side that's saying, that side's corrupt, we can fix this, but we need your help. But then they have a track record of not really delivering and also not having a coherent message. And then so now you have this younger demographic of people who can vote, but they've seen nothing in recent history to tell them that that's going to get real results. And they're inundated with social media in which all they see is suffering, and death and destruction. And it looks like our leaders are hapless in actually doing anything to confront it. So in a sense, like you can actually give young people a little bit of you can empathize with like why they feel this way, whether it's, Gaza, whether it's climate change. I mean, they've been just kind of raised in this sense of like this shoe's about to drop. But that also just falls on local leaders, and I would say predominantly Democrats, since most young people tend to be more liberal, not really articulating that progress is not an immediate thing. It's a steady burn, and you have to actually continue to work at it. And if you can't say that, like, progress is incremental and really get people to buy into that, then it's all for nothing. And I think then it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. So yeah.
In the short term, I'm not sure what you do about anti-Semitism on campus. I mean, they're taking some action. Some, maybe not enough for a lot of folks, but in the long term, I mean, look, the reason these kids didn't get this from nowhere, right? They got this either from social media, but a lot of it is from their professors. I mean, that's who you see out there with them. There are professors out there, these adjuncts making, $35,000 a year, telling kids, kids who are paying $90, telling them all this stuff. Like, this is the issue, right? So if you're a college, what do you care about, right? You care about existing, you care about funding. And as long as schools are able to use taxpayer money to fund people who are saying, who are not giving the groundwork so that people can have more, sophisticated and nuanced ideas about these things, then in the long term, I mean, that's the kind of thing you have to change. You cannot just have one group of people saying, we're bad, they're bad, it's bad, and nobody on the other side, right? Nobody offering, other kinds of studies. Nobody saying, okay, well, then this is also a thing you should consider. This is the way to get published, the way to get tenure, is to say as much as you can about this subject. And as long as the system is set up to promote and encourage these folks to come on, that's what's going to matter. So in the long term, it's going to take, a little more thoughtful reflection on what is the makeup of the professors, what is the makeup of the classes. Are we making sure we're presenting a full contingent of discipline for folks to learn more about history?
Moving on to a completely different issue, which is slightly less controversial, but still very controversial, is something Joe was up in Oregon doing some reporting on, and this is also something that's before the U.S. Supreme Court. So, Joe, I'm going to let you lay out what the situation is and why the small town of Grants Pass, Oregon, is important, and why this case is being watched very closely by people pretty much across the spectrum here in San Francisco.
Yeah, and then Melissa, you're going to take the legal aspects of this. Yes, yeah. So Grants Pass is a city about an hour north of the California border, 40,000 people, and it's right along the Rogue River. If anyone's been up there, a beautiful place, and its population doubled over the last 20 years, and many of the it's seen many of the same factors we've seen here in the Bay Area and across California. They didn't build enough housing. They built very little affordable housing, very little multifamily housing, and people started, over the last several years, started camping out in the parks and sleeping in the parks. They had previously been elsewhere in the forest, and then there was only one shelter in town, and it was a Christian-run shelter. And so you're not allowed to smoke there, you're not allowed to bring your partners, and you have to go to chapel services twice a day for 30 to 45 minutes. And as a fallen Catholic, that's torturous enough. So the city decided some ordinances that would say, well, you're not allowed, you can't camp in the parks for more than 3 days. So what happens there? Every 3 days, police come by and say, okay, you got to move along. So everybody packs up their tents and all their stuff. And you can only have I think it's an 8x8 square. And then you have to move along to the next park. I mean, it's not like there's no place to go. And these are not people who are, for the most part, people who have come here for benefits and tourists because many people grew up nearby. I talked to people like, where'd you grow up? I grew up around the corner. I used to play in this park as a kid. The homeless advocates and if you don't move, you could be fined, and then if you don't pay the fine, because these are people who are living on the street. They're not, they have major credit, if credit cards are slapping down here, you could be jailed. Advocates took this to court. They said this violates the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. This has wound its way up to the Supreme Court. It's a very sad situation there, and it sort of looks like the past, present, and future of homelessness in this country. And I guess we're living in the present, and if this becomes the law of the land, this is what we could see. I mean, we already see it in our cities, but this could be the situation that's ongoing forever. It's not this Supreme Court case is not going to give us a solution to homelessness. It's going to give us cities and let's take it. It'll give cities a way to deal with encampments and such. And it's very odd because we've had a very legally very odd set of bedfellows here. We have Mayor Breed, we have Governor Newsom, and a lot of Democrats asking the very conservative Supreme Court to hear this thing. And they're like, they don't want them to hear a lot of other cases, but they want them to hear this one. So it's very sad. I saw I'll just give you one anecdote from there. One of the people I spoke with is a gentleman who grew up, actually born and raised in the Bay Area, and he moved up to Oregon about 20 years ago, because he's like, well, I can, like many people, I can buy a little house here and have my family there. And then they downsized to a smaller house in Grants Pass, near one of these parks a couple years ago. And he starts seeing these folks camping in the parks. He goes, I see needles and I see all kinds of stuff. And he joined a neighborhood group saying, let's take back our parks. The sad part about it is one of the people who's in the parks a lot is his own son, and he, to the point where he's struggling with addiction, and he said, why don't you have he pitched a tent in like a slab in his backyard. And so his son comes there some nights because they won't, after this is a person in his middle 30s, if anyone's dealt with addictions in their families, it's very difficult. You have to draw boundaries, and this is the boundaries they've drawn. So there's a million really sad and horrible things there. So anyways, but the legal aspect of this is, the impact of this could be far-reaching.
Sorry, it's a really good story. You should read it. So it's weird because I'm going to bring it around here. But so back in the 70s, California had a law, which is kind of odd to think about now. But the law said it was a crime to be addicted to narcotics, to just be addicted, like not to buy it or anything like that, just like be an addict was a crime. And so this goes up to the U.S. Supreme Court. I know, yeah, I had to look it up. I was like, there's no way this is real. It's real. So it goes up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says you can't outlaw a status, right? You can't outlaw someone for being an addict, right? That is a violation of the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. So fast forward, 2019, there's this case called the Martin case, and this is out of Boise, Idaho, and this has to do with one of their let's just call them camping laws. I mean, we know what they mean. They sort of sit-lie kind of ordinances. So Boise, Idaho has a camping law. The Ninth Circuit goes back and pulls this old Robinson case and says, if you don't have enough shelters for the involuntarily homeless, then you are penalizing someone because of their status. It's the same thing as penalizing somebody for being an addict. You're penalizing them for being homeless. And you can't do that. That is cruel and unusual. And so that's the underpinning of the case. So that's the Martin case, and that is in 2019. Now, that case, on top of that case, is this Grants Pass case, right? That's why the court is sort of enjoined the Grants Pass law. It is also why the Martin case is also underpinning why San Francisco has been enjoined from enforcing a number of laws, state and local, as well. And so that's why in LA has had a similar issue. San Clemente has had the issue. San Diego has had the issue. All across the state, local ordinances are being enjoined, essentially halted from enforcement because of this underlying case. And so everyone's trying to get the Martin case undone, basically wiped out, because everybody's cases. And so that's what they talked a lot about, was what does this status mean, the status of homelessness? Can we even know what that means? Does it change every day? I mean, it's very, very complicated. But that's essentially the issue. So if the Martin case, under the Grants Pass case, is overturned, then that will have an impact on how San Francisco can move forward, because since Martin, everybody's been using this equation: more homeless people than beds, can't enforce it. More homeless people than beds, can't enforce it. More homeless people than and that's, ascertaining who's involuntarily homeless is a very difficult thing, if not impossible. The courts won't tell anyone what that exactly how to do that, and then do it, and knowing at all times how what the shelter bed count is. Municipalities have argued that that's nothing. Here's what's interesting though. So the Grant Pass law is so harsh that the state of California and the city of San Francisco did not even defend it. Like, if you look at their briefs, the briefs are not for either party, because they go in and they go, the Grants Pass law is a little crazy. We're not defending that. What we want is our own law, because the Grants Pass one says you can't sleep or you can't camp anywhere on public land ever 24 hours a day. Now, the way they enforce it is the 3-day thing, but the law itself says you can't sleep or you can't camp anywhere on public land 24 hours a day. Harsh. And so, I can see it's because people are very fed up, so I don't mean to minimize that. But it's a really tough law. And so when you see the San Francisco brief and the California brief, it's like, Grants Pass may have overstepped there. You do want to have some place for people to be, but in our places, like in San Francisco, sit-lie is from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., so it's just the key, and it's sidewalks, so you got to just keep people able to walk. And so they actually are even sort of pulling back a little bit from the actual Grants Pass law that everybody kind of agrees is pretty aggressive. So it's not the ideal. There are a couple technical reasons why they could kick this one back down and say, you got to try this case, or they could do something really sort of broad-based and say, we're going to overturn Martin, and then we could move forward maybe with enforcing some of our state and local laws as well. So that's why everyone's sort of watching that, saying our restrictions are really reasonable. They do allow people to sleep, just not everywhere all the time.
Josh?
Yeah, I can't speak to the legal stuff, obviously, and I haven't been to Grants Pass. I could just tell you what's happening here in San Francisco. And the way that it's being enforced here in San Francisco has changed over the last 7 months, let's say. Because up until November, the city was essentially saying, well, because of the Grants Pass decision, our hands are tied, and we just got to wait and see what happens. And that's when, over last year, not everyone, but many people in San Francisco got fed up. They just looked up and down Van Ness Avenue and a lot of freeway underpasses, and common residential streets you wouldn't expect tents, where people were just sleeping there and accumulating trash and items. And what happened was APEC happened in November, and the city was like, oh, wow, all the world leaders are coming to town. Maybe we could actually change the way we're doing this. Maybe that stuff is blocking the sidewalk more than we really realized, and we can actually tell them to clear. We have Secret Service coming in. We can actually use federal rules to actually help us enact this kind of movement of people and property. And so all of a sudden, San Francisco started to clean up a little bit. And even Governor Newsom, when he came to town, said, oh, it's amazing what can happen when the president of China comes to town. And so, they created a real containment zone of fences and security in the downtown core to make sure it was safe for all of these delegates and foreign leaders. And and everybody kind of walked around, and despite seeing people with rifles, there was a sense of oh, this is what it could be like if we actually didn't allow people to sleep on the sidewalks anywhere they want. And APEC finishes and things kind of resume, but San Francisco's like, oh no, we actually got a little momentum here. Maybe we should keep this going. And so there's kind of this hedging of trying to make sure they're complying with the law, but maybe enforcing it a little bit more. You will see, I work over by the Central Freeway, so right when you're trying to get on 101 to head south. And there's always tents and fire pits and property that accumulates under the overpass. But every week or two, you'll go by there, and it's completely clear. And you're like, oh, so clearly something happened here. They blocked just enough of the sidewalk or the road or whatever it was to actually move people out. So I think until we get a decision, we're going to see this kind of ebb and flow of people on streets. There will be some movement. There will obviously be advocates for homeless people out there trying to make sure that they're not having their stuff thrown away and not being just kind of kicked to the curb to the next block or whatever it is. But really, and I've talked about this with candidates. I talked about it with Chris Larson. He's a billionaire who started a crypto company, and he is one of the biggest funders of local campaigns in the city. And I was asking him, he funds Mayor Breed. He's a huge supporter of Mayor Breed and kind of public safety ballot measures, surveillance cameras, and all this stuff. And I asked him, I was like, do you really think there's going to be any dent in the homelessness crisis until San Francisco just says, you know what, screw it, we're building mass shelters, mass congregate shelters, take warehouses, make them into giant dorm rooms, really start, refurbishing these empty buildings to try and do that. And he told me, absolutely, that is what's going to happen. No one wants to say it. All the elected leaders know it's a controversial issue because one, these people who are living on the streets have so many different challenges, whether it's mental health, whether it's addiction, whether it's a partner or a pet or what have you. There's all these different things. So it's just a quagmire to try and solve, but you can't make a dent in it until you start giving people at least the option to go somewhere. And I do believe that actually we'll start talking about this, if not later this year, by next year, whoever becomes mayor is going to actually say, we have to do large shelters, and that's going to be the new policy.
Okay, well, I was going to have a whole section talking about the mayoral race. We're almost out of time before we get to the news quiz, so let me just boil it down to like one question, and that is the top candidates, arguably Mayor Breed, Mark Farrell, Daniel Lurie, and now Aaron Peskin. Am I missing anyone you would put in that group? Okay.
Ashraf
Safai.
Safai, supervisor, would be very hurt
Yeah,
if you didn't mention his name.
You'll be getting a call immediately after this.
He is also
and he
someone
will.
who is in the race.
He will.
Who do you think has the momentum? Who do you think has maybe the best team and money behind them? Those might be different things, but
Look, the deadline to file to run is May 15th, so we still could get somebody throwing their hat in the ring and taking a look at the landscape. Right now, just in terms of resources, you would have to say, and I don't just mean money, I mean operatives and people on the ground. It has to be Mayor Breed because she has been working since she's been in office to make relationships with Democratic operatives and funders. And we're in the quiet period right now. People aren't really paying attention to it, and so candidates aren't really spending money right now. It will ramp up closer to the election times. Everyone's sort of hoarding everything. And so people could raise more money. They could come with better infrastructure, but it's hard to beat an incumbent for this reason because they spend all that time sort of amassing that support within the party and within the fundraisers.
okay. Josh?
Yeah, so right now, I would agree with Melissa that Mayor Breed has to be kind of considered the slight potential frontrunner. I think it's between her and former supervisor, interim Mayor Mark Farrell. However, when it comes to the money, Daniel Lurie, who is a nonprofit founder and heir to the Levi Strauss fortune, he is very likely to self-fund his campaign, which has not been done that I can remember in San Francisco. And that could be where he spends up to maybe $10 million of his own money on a race like this, which sounds like quite a lot because it is. And but that's just a fraction of the spending. We're going to have the most expensive mayor's race in the history of San Francisco this year. And there's already a committee that is funded by Lurie's mother and his brother and others that has spent $3 million putting billboards all over town. You probably got these mail pieces that are super cool. There's a brochure. It's like 12 pages. He even actually created a mailer that's a sign to put in your window. It folds open. I've never seen that in all the campaigns where he's just like, here's my sign. I mean, these are mail pieces that literally could cost like $1 a piece. We joke that he spent more on postage than Asha Safai spent on his whole campaign, or at least this IE did, this committee. And so, like,
Is that yeah?
yeah, so like when it comes to Lurie, like I'm not going to say necessarily that he is, likely to win, but he's definitely spending as much money as possible and likely to spend much more to make himself a figure in what's a ranked choice vote. So you have to rank your candidates. Mark Farrell, so you've got Breed in the middle, who's been kind of talking tough on public safety. You got Mark Farrell, who's tacking a little bit to the right, saying, I'm going to clear homeless people off the street. We're going to bring in the National Guard. He says, I'm going to fire the police chief. And then you got Daniel Lurie, who's tacking a little bit to the left of Mayor Breed. And then you got Aaron Peskin over here, who's his own. Anybody who's been in San Francisco, I think the laughter kind of says we all know what Aaron Peskin is built different. And the North Beach supervisor, the bearded one, as he's called in the Chinese American community, he's got a lot of connections. He's progressive.
No, he's not.
Well, he's not progressive on housing. This is like when we come back to the
Yes,
definition
this
of
is-
what's progressive
yeah.
and moderate, then like I stepped
He
into that
sometimes
one.
votes progressive. I'm not
Yeah.
saying he doesn't have some progressive.
In this
views,
race,
but
he counts as
he's,
one.
But everyone's like the progressive candidate. It's like this is not.
He's
Bernie
brandishing
Sanders.
himself.
Come on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's a property owner. He is known to be a neighborhood preservationist. He definitely knows the way that the levers of power work better than just about anyone since Willie Brown. Yeah. This is a guy who's now on his 4th term as a supervisor. So like, he's a legitimate threat who could sneak in the back door through a ranked choice vote system. I'm hogging the microphone. Joe, what do you think?
Oh, I'm enjoying all this. One of the problems that the mayor has is that number one, she did 71% disapproval rating in the poll we did a couple months ago. She's a known quantity. And people many voters will be tying her to what they think about San Francisco, rightly or wrongly. They're like, you're the mayor, things are screwed up here. And that's always hard. And then ranked choice voting, as you alluded to, we've really never, well, I guess we have seen this a little bit, but not 5 major candidates. I guess we did it, in the Ed Leith, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. But this is going to be really interesting because we did a poll a couple months ago that said 35% of the respondents said we would vote for Mayor Breed 4th. That was before Peskin got in. So if you're going to vote, you pick up to 10 people and you rank them, and then we won't bore you with that. There's plenty of time to talk about that. But that could scramble everything. We don't know, and who are the alliances? Nobody's going to go 1 and 2 with the mayor because she disliked by 35. She has a 71% disapproval rating. And is Peskin? He can count on maybe 35% of the 40% of the more left-leaning vote. But where will that be enough to take him over the top? Can Farrell and Lurie, do they go 1 and 2? That polls show that they can do that. It's going to be a wild finish.
And it's really not even necessarily the candidates themselves, I think, that'll tip the scales. I think it's going to be the outside committees. And we talk about the influence of tech money and billionaires who are investing in different groups. You have Neighbors for a Better San Francisco. You have Together SF Action, which is actually funded by Michael Moritz, who also funded the Standard. You have Abundant SF, a bunch of tech families that are raising millions. These groups have and Grow SF is also a very influential group. These groups have a really huge ability to sway the dialogue, to launch opposition campaigns, to allow these candidates to latch on to ballot measures and essentially raise unlimited amount of money outside the normal campaign limits. To actually brand themselves. And like Mayor Breed's going to attach herself to multiple issues. Farrell's already attaching himself to charter reform to give the mayor more powers. Lurie's got more money than, he knows what to do with. And so I think these are really very much going to actually be the vehicles that people get their message out more than their individual.
Right. We have to remember, there's not that many voters in San Francisco. So where does the law of diminishing returns come? I mean, how many pamphlets can Lurie crank out before you're like, oh Jesus, another sign from Lurie I'm being mailed to? But we don't know.
Well, I think the last mayor's race was like $8 million, roughly, the less real mayor's race This one, let's say it goes up to maybe 15, 20 million. At 20 million, there's 500,000 registered voters. So then if you do the math, I mean, like, that's $10 a vote. Like, that's insane. Yeah.
Everybody, I want to thank Josh Kane, Melissa Kane, and Joe Garofoli, our great panel for today. Thanks all of you here in the room and everyone watching and listening online. Have a great week.